Suppose you glance at a clock that, unbeknownst to you, is broken, showing the same time all day long. Nonetheless, you happen to look at the clock precisely when it shows the correct time, so your belief about the time is correct. My question is this: did you know what time it is? Perhaps you think you did. After all, you formed a belief on the basis of a device that most people trust, and that belief was true. What else would it mean to know something? Well, in academic philosophy, the orthodox answer to this kind of thought experiment is no. People who perform better on tests of reflective reasoning also tend to report this orthodox answer. And if you're a regular listener, you may know that philosophers are particularly reflective thinkers. These correlations may make you wonder about causation. Does thinking reflectively cause people to accept philosophers' orthodoxy? Or is it the other way around? Does studying thought experiments like the broken clock case somehow result in people performing better on reflection tests? In this episode, I'll tell you all about the experiments I ran to find out. The paper's titled Reflection, Philosophy, Order Effects, and Correlations Across Samples, and has been accepted for publication in Analysis. The paper will also mention other thought experiments, various tests of reflection, and the importance of data quality in decision science. As always, free preprints of my papers are available on my CV at birdnick.com/CV under Publications. This podcast is sponsored by Spark Education, who is offering a free 30-minute class demo for your child. You can read about the testimonials, stats, and all the activities included in their latest offer at sparkmath.pxf.io/POBNOR. Reflection, Philosophy, Order Effects, and Correlations Across Samples. Abstract. Reflective reasoning often correlates with certain philosophical decisions, but it is often unclear whether reflection causes those decisions. So, a pre-registered experiment assessed how reflective thinking relates to decisions about 10 thought experiments from epistemology, ethics, and philosophy of mind. Participants from the United States were recruited from Amazon Mechanical Turk, Cloud Research, Prolific, and a university. One participant source yielded up to 18 times as many low-quality respondents as the other 3. Among remaining respondents, some prior correlations between reflective and philosophical thinking replicated. For example, reflection predicted denying that accidentally justified true beliefs count as knowledge. However, reflection test order did not impact philosophical decisions. Instead, a philosophical reflection effect emerged. Making philosophical decisions before the reflection test improved reflection test performance. These and other data suggest causal paths between reflection and philosophy can go in both directions, but detecting such results can depend on factors such as data quality. Introduction. How are philosophical thinking and reflective thinking related? Certain philosophical decisions have correlated with performance on tests of reflective thinking, but are those correlations causal? If so, do the reflection tests cause changes in philosophical thinking, or is it the other way around? More than a decade of quantitative research finds mixed results, as well as surprisingly low data quality from some online research participant pools. So, a pre-registered experiment on reflective and philosophical thinking that employed various measures of data quality recruited online participants from 4 common sources. Low-quality participants were not equally distributed across pools. In the aggregate sample of acceptable data, some prior results failed to replicate, and an unexpected causal effect emerged. These results confirm the importance of participant source, data quality, and sample size. They also suggest a mechanism by which studying philosophy can improve critical thinking. Reflection tests. Reflection tests are tasks designed to lure people toward a particular, intuitively appealing response that, with a moment's reflection, they can realize is incorrect. For example, if you're running a race and you pass the person in second place, what place would you be in now? This lures many people to think first place, but people who reconsider their initial responses and/or consciously consider reasons are far more likely to realize the answer is actually second place. Reflection and philosophy. Philosophers often perform better on reflection tests, and reflective thinking often correlates with certain philosophical decisions, even among philosophers. Consider thought experiments that assess whether we think that accidentally justified true belief counts as knowledge. A famous version of this case asks whether someone knows what time it is if they formed a true belief about the time on the basis of a clock that, unbeknownst to them, is broken. Philosophers' orthodox response seems to be no. And across 24 countries and 17 languages, correct reflection test responses predicted that orthodox response. Reflection test performance has also correlated with decisions about moral dilemmas, political priorities, and religious apostasy. Are these philosophical correlates of reflection caused by reflective thinking? Causal effects of reflection on philosophical decisions are not always detected. Some researchers have attempted to get people thinking reflectively by placing a reflection test immediately before versus after some philosophical stimuli. This reflection test order effect increased average acceptance of sacrificial harm on some moral dilemmas, but this reflection test order effect has repeatedly failed to replicate since the original result and since the current research was conducted. These null results have prompted research suggesting that the relationship between reflection and moral dilemmas may have more to do with the mathematical reasoning required by common reflection tests than with reflection per se. One may wonder if we should also reassess the causal relationships between reflection and other philosophical decisions. Participant source and data quality. An increasing portion of surveys and experiments are completed by online crowd workers. Unfortunately, data quality and replicability are no longer ensured by the worker quality metrics on the crowdwork platforms that are widely used in online research. Worse, removing low-effort, disingenuous, fraudulent, or potentially bot-produced survey responses seems to overturn attention-grabbing results, such as alarming rates of alleged prophylactic household cleaner ingestion during the COVID-19 pandemic. So, measuring and controlling for data quality is increasingly important. The current research. This paper aims to clarify how reflective and philosophical thinking are related by deploying various tests of reflection, philosophy, and data quality to a broad range of participant samples in a pre-registered reflection test order experiment. See the Open Science Framework for the pre-registration, data, analysis files, and supplementary materials. Methods. In late 2020, this experiment was pushed out to 4 participant sources to test the following predictions. Reflection test order will impact judgments about some philosophical thought experiments, including moral dilemmas. A minority of our adapted reasoning items will seem familiar to participants, and reflection test familiarity will correlate with better reflection test performance. Our secondary goals were to assess response distributions, demographic differences, and platform differences in reflection test familiarity. Data quality was assessed with both overt and covert methods. Participants. Positive reflection test order effects on philosophical decisions can be small. Precision for planning analysis suggested 50 participants per condition for a target margin of error of 0.4. With 2 conditions, the pre-registered goal was 100 participants per participant source, or else the maximum we could recruit during our pre-registered timeline. We simultaneously recruited adults in the U.S. from Amazon Mechanical Turk, or MTurk, Cloud Research's approved list of MTurk workers, Prolific, and a pool of undergraduate students. When 100 participants were recruited from a source, low-quality submissions were rejected to allow for 100 acceptable submissions per participant source. Data quality. To identify low-quality data, Qualtrics' covert fraud detection tools computed the probability of bot assistance, repeat responding, and other problematic survey behaviors. Various overt data quality checks were also developed. One data quality test instructed participants to write a complete sentence explaining what might have happened just before a photograph of an angry-looking person was taken. Bot-assisted, inattentive, or non-fluent English responders may describe the photo, such as, "the man is angry," instead of explain it, such as, "the man's team lost." Incomplete sentences, such as anger or angry man, are also signs of low data quality. Participants were also asked, when completing the study, did you at any point use outside information? 31 participants admitted that they did. Another item presented a 2-sentence summary of how low effort and deceitful survey respondents can produce false scientific theories before asking, do you deserve to be paid for this study? 4 participants selected no. Of the participants that failed these data quality tests, 87% were from MTurk, even though worker qualifications were identical across MTurk, Cloud Research, and Prolific. Only CrowdWork participants that had at least 500 completed submissions with at least a 98% acceptance rate could participate. This remarkably uneven distribution of low-quality respondents aligns with a growing literature suggesting that MTurk's internal completion and acceptance metrics are poor indicators of expected data quality. These crowd-worker metrics may be uninformative because researchers rarely reject low-quality submissions, a potential collective action problem in online survey research. To help address this problem, low-quality submissions were rejected. Analyses focus on the participants who passed the data quality tests. Procedure. This experiment randomized the order of 2 main question blocks, a reasoning block, including reflection tests, LSAT questions, etc., and a block of philosophical thought experiments, such as Gettier cases, moral dilemmas, etc. Items were randomized within each block. Manipulation. Following prior reflection testing experiments, the order of the reasoning and philosophy blocks was randomized. Half of participants started the experiment with the reasoning tests, and the other half started with the thought experiments. Reflection tests. Reasoning tests that lure people into accepting alluring but incorrect responses, also known as reflection tests, were adapted to limit the degree to which test performance can be explained by participants searching for answers online. More generic reasoning tests were also included in this block, such as the Raven's matrices test, the Knights and Knaves problem, and Monty Hall. Reflection tests also included Wason card selection, the conjunction fallacy, belief bias, base race neglect, and the cognitive reflection test 2. Just 30% of our adapted reasoning items seemed familiar to participants, regardless of their source or data quality. That relatively low familiarity rate is similar to that of a validated verbal reflection test. However, the correlation between familiarity and performance was nearly twice as large when we were using those validated test items, compared to this experiment's method of adapting new items. Test familiarity was also similar across demographics, and the average number of correct answers between males and females differed by just 0.5 out of 13. Thought experiments. Popular philosophy thought experiments were updated for general audiences. Each thought experiment's philosophical decision and source can be found in Table 2. The vignette's topics spanned epistemology, ethics, and philosophy of mind. So we used 2 Gettier cases, the case known as TrueTemp, a brain in a vat case, a teletransporter case, a twin Earth case, a case about determined action and whether one can be fully responsible for such determined action, the CEO case from the Nobe Effect, two moral dilemmas. One is titled Romantic Deception, in which you're asked whether you should lie to a partner to enhance some greater good about the relationship, and one titled Daughter Sex Work, in which you are asked whether to employ your daughter in the sex industry to help feed your family in a developing country that is experiencing crop failure. Response distributions to both reflection and philosophy items were fairly similar across platforms. Visualizations can be found alongside the other open materials. Results. As in prior work, philosophical decisions that correlated with reflection test performance were often unaffected by the reflection testing order effect. However, there was an order effect of philosophical thinking on reflection. Participant source and data quality also seemed to matter. Undetected reflection testing effects. No reflection testing effects on thought experiments were detected, adding to a list of such null effects on philosophical decisions. Philosophical reflection effect? Testing reflection in both the reasoning first and philosophy first conditions allowed for a test of whether one condition resulted in more reflective reasoning than the other, something that cannot be tested when reflection is measured in only the reflection first condition. In this experiment, starting with the philosophical thought experiments increased the number of correct reflection test responses by about 1 out of 13, compared to the reflection first condition. Although this result was not predicted when dual process theorists claimed that reflective thinking causes changes in philosophical decisions, this result aligns with plenty of correlational data, as I'll explain in section 4.3. Importantly, this philosophical reflection effect was undetected in low-quality respondents, confirming that data quality can impact what results are detected. Correlational analysis. Aggregating across sources, reflection test performance predicted responses to some thought experiments, even though these correlations were often undetected in some of the 4 constituent subsamples. Notably, sometimes a correlation was detected in a subsample, despite being undetected in the aggregate. This paper's statistical inferences are drawn only from the aggregate cross-sectional results. The lower-powered subsectional results merely illustrate what some researchers may have inferred if they'd collected just 1 or 2 of the 4 subsamples. Replicated correlations. Results from each thought experiment conceptually replicated correlations between reflection test performance and philosophers' orthodox response of denying knowledge in cases of accidentally true justified belief, that is, the Gettier and True Temp cases. Figure 4 shows a reliable correlation. We also found correlations between reflection test performance and less attribution of responsibility when a harmful action is causally determined. Correlations that failed to replicate. The case-by-case analysis did not conceptually replicate correlations between reflection and attributing intent to the CEO's harmful side effect. This may not be surprising. The probability that prior researchers would have observed at least as much correlation as they did between intention attribution and reflection test performance, if there was no correlation, was just 4%. That's also the probability of a fair coin landing on the same side 59 out of 100 flips. Unless we would reject that that coin is fair, we should not reject the null hypothesis about reflective thinking and decisions about the CEO case. We also failed to replicate correlations between reflection and causing some harm to mitigate greater harm. Indeed, one of the 2 correlations was the reverse of what dual process theories predict. Reflection predicted rejection of the utilitarian sacrificial trade-off. One hypothesis about why these 2 results deviate from so many prior results is that the dilemmas we included did not explicitly quantify a sacrificial harm trade-off, like the trolley, crying baby, bomb threat, and other harm one to save many moral dilemma decisions that have correlated with decisions on explicitly arithmetic reflection tests. Other undetected correlations. Further analysis did not detect correlations between reflection test performance and judgments about the identity of someone who used a teletransporter, or between reflection test performance and whether the meaning of words is purely psychological, such as in the Twin Earth case, or between reflection test performance and participants' denial that they know they are participating in a study, such as in our brain in a vat case. Reflection and epistemology. The first and last of these correlational results form an interesting pattern. Correct reflection test answers reliably predicted philosophers' orthodox response of denying knowledge in the Gettier and true temp cases. This raises the question of whether philosophers' orthodox response to these epistemic thought experiments is caused by a tendency to reflect more than others upon knowledge. Consider two objections to this reflective orthodoxy hypothesis and one counter-objection. First, perhaps denying knowledge in these cases may be less about reflective thinking in particular than skepticism more generally. This alternative idea is that some people perform well on reflection tests and deny knowledge in certain thought experiments because they're more likely to question everything from their initial response on a reflection test to the possibility of knowledge more generally. If this latter objection were sound, then we should have detected a similar correlation between reflection and denying knowledge in the brain in a vat thought experiment. However, we did not. So the alternative skepticism hypothesis is not well supported by these data. A second objection is that reflection test order did not impact judgments in the Gettier or true temp cases relative to the philosophy first condition. This could mean that reflective thinking fails to encourage more orthodox responses to such thought experiments. However, reflective interventions modeled on Socratic discussion, such as what we find in philosophy conferences and seminars, have yielded more correct responses on reflection tests and certain responses to certain thought experiments, including the orthodox response to Gettier cases. So this paper's results may not refute the reflective orthodoxy hypothesis so much as refute the assumption that reflection tests cause reflective thinking. One implication of the reflection orthodoxy hypothesis is a sort of dual process theory that applies to more than just moral decisions. Perhaps some thought experiments, like Gettier's, prompt a certain response among less reflective thinkers that more reflective thinkers abandon for philosophers' orthodox response. Of course, this broader dual process theory about philosophical intuitions would have to be explained by reflective thinking itself and not, say, the observation that philosophers sometimes use words differently than others. Admittedly, the present data do not suggest reflective thinking explains all orthodox intuitions about thought experiments. Although greater reflection predicted denying full responsibility for a determined action case, most surveyed philosophers believe that free will is compatible with determinism. Discussion. To clarify previously mixed results in experimental philosophy, a pre-registered reflection test order experiment was conducted on 4 common pools of research participants. The results suggest that we may need to rethink the relationships between reflective and philosophical thinking, as well as the methods we employ in online survey experiments. Participant source and data quality. The rate of low data quality was up to 18 times higher among MTurk workers, not recruited via cloud research, compared to the other 3 samples, which were largely equivalent in data quality. Moreover, some of what we detected was found only in the higher quality participants. These data quality results support emerging themes in survey methods research. First, the statistical significance of results can depend on data quality, even when using strict selection criteria on crowdwork platforms like Amazon Mechanical Turk. Second, we should not expect similar data quality from all participant pools. So survey researchers should be mindful of where they get participants. They should measure data quality and then control for data quality. The differences between the cross-sectional and subsectional results also suggest caution about what we infer from relatively small samples from a single source. Each subsample has only a fraction of the statistical power that the aggregated sample contains, which can easily explain how a result that was undetected in some subsamples could be detected in the aggregate. However, sometimes a correlation was detected in a subsample that was undetected in the aggregate, which empirically illustrates how correlations may not stabilize in analyses of fewer than 250 observations. To overcome insufficient power, unrepresentative samples, and other forms of sampling error that can breed overconfidence in potentially false positives or false negatives, researchers should oversample in order to ensure enough statistical power remains after rejecting low-quality respondents. Otherwise, they may not actually be subjecting their predictions to severe tests. Researchers should also incorporate other best practices from online data collection. Reflection test order. The reflection test order manipulation seemed thoroughly impotent for philosophical decisions. None of the 10 decisions about thought experiments depended on whether participants completed the block of reasoning tests immediately before versus after. This is not the first or the second or the third or the fourth publication of a failure to replicate a reflection test order effect. So trust in reflection test order experiments as a method to activate reflection should be discounted accordingly. And it may be that manipulating reflection test order is just one of many reflection interventions that are not expected to work. Although this paper's total sample size is far from the thousands of participants needed to demonstrate a null or even practically null effect, Kova and colleagues found that manipulations of reasoners' context, such as the order of 2 tests, were about 30% as likely to replicate as manipulations of reasoners' content, such as what the tests contain. Results like these have led some to argue for a, quote, striking stability of philosophical intuitions across manipulations designed to increase reflectiveness, end quote. Of course, this paper and many others suggest that philosophical intuitions are sufficiently variable to correlate with individual differences in reflection test performance. A philosophical reflection hypothesis. This warning about context manipulations also applies to this paper's unregistered philosophical reflection effect. Thinking about philosophical thought experiments before a reflection test did result in slightly better reflection test performance than thinking about the thought experiments after the reflection test. This order effect does not by itself confer much confidence that philosophical thought experiments promote reflective thinking, but triangulating on additional independent bodies of evidence may provide some support for this hypothesis. First, studying philosophy predicts better reflection test performance, even when studying other fields predicts worse performance in the same statistical model. Second, case-based learning has improved exam scores and other cognitive outcomes compared to traditional lecture-based learning. Third, there's growing evidence that even though philosophy undergraduates reason better than peers in their first year, they somehow improve more than their peers by their final year, a pair of results that would be improbable if a null or regression to the mean hypothesis is true. By adding this paper to the literature, we have preliminary evidence for the hypothesis that philosophical thought experiments, quote, can encourage people to think through issues that they would otherwise not consider seriously, or to think about them in a new light, end quote. The more that philosophical reflection effects replicate, the more that dual process theories about philosophical thinking should be supplemented. Even if reflective thinking causes certain philosophical decisions, it may be that philosophical thinking also causes more reflective decisions. If you enjoyed the Upon Reflection podcast, you can subscribe wherever you find podcasts. You can follow on Blue Sky at birdnick.com, on Mastodon at birdnick, and on all the other platforms. Comments and questions can be submitted at birdnick.com/contact. And of course, if you end up enjoying the Upon Reflection podcast, then feel free to tell people about it, online, in person, or in your review. This podcast is sponsored by Spark Education, who is offering a free 30-minute class demo for your child. You can read about the testimonials, stats, and all the activities included in their latest offer at sparkmath.pfx.io/POBNOR.